Gray light lifts itself over the yard, reluctant as a mule. The column falls in with the sound of leather and sleep, boots scuffing, belts being remembered, a cough swallowed because the sergeant has eyes. The quartermaster's cart lurches into place with 2 firkins and a bucket that once pretended to be respectable. The staves creak like old knuckles. You step to the cask head with your new authority and your new burden. Bung key on a thong, dipstick notched in quartz, and a stub of chalk that will make enemies if your hand lies. If you want to watch how a barrel becomes a policy and not a fight, come closer. Tap subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the knack, a copper, a chalk ring, and a voice that stays behind your teeth. We'll cut the ale with clean water enough to reach the next stage, keep the lads upright, and post what we did where anyone can read it. The brook you boiled at dawn still lifts steam from the copper like it is proud to be clean. Camp kettles hiss. Vinegar stings the air where you scoured the firkins. Oak stave swollen with the hot rinse. Hoops happy to be taken seriously for an hour. You draw the bung with the key, and the first sweet breath of the ale wakes the drummer boy's opinions. Watering is theft, he whispers at your elbow. Voice the exact size of a mutiny if anyone richer repeats it. You hold up 2 fingers and waggle your wrist, the hand sign that means enough. The captain, who has given up on certain kinds of romance, points with his jaw toward the copper. Make it travel, he says. His eyes live on your chalk hand. You set the dipstick in the firkin and watch the froth creep down the notches. 2 gills past the chalk line the alewife swore was honest. The stick comes up wet. You mark the level with your thumb. You put the first ring of chalk around the cask head where the column can learn to trust arithmetic. Small beer is 1 to 2, the alewife said last year when soldiers were a rumor and winter had time for a sermon. Today the road is longer. You have your orders and your guess, 1 to 1 or less, enough for feet, not songs. You dip the can and pour the first copper's worth into the firkin. The edge of the chalk ring smiles at you without forgiveness. The ladle answers gravity like it owes coin. You swirl the cask with your hip, slow and even. Because agitation makes foam and foam makes fools. The NCOs measure the men with, looks the way coopers measure staves. Your chalk circles a second time where the first ring was proud of being alone. Then you lift the dipstick and watch. The wet mark kisses the notch you wanted. Good. The first dilution earns its bread. A lad from the 3rd file tries to drink from the firkin before count. His thirst is a theology. An NCO's palm slaps the bung back with a flat noise that writes a proverb on everyone's eyelids. Not yet. The boy steps back into the column with the shame that makes people competent. You pretend you did not see him fail to become an anecdote. You post the strength, 1, 1, on the cask head with a chalk that refuses poetry. The captain's elbows loosen by the width of a nail. He doesn't smile, he doesn't have to. He taps his knuckles twice on the plank of the cart. The drum taps answer in their own language, and the ration begins as if it were a psalm. Pints by squad, jacks by habit. Gills for the men the surgeon has excused from spirits, folded list in your breast to prove it. The cooper's kit lives in the limber chest, spiles, drivers, hoops, in case the world enjoys trouble. The alewife's ledger rides under your plank with last year's strengths you can pretend to consult when courage wants a witness. You tip the first pint into the first cup with the showmanship of someone who would rather survive than impress. Strong, calls a wag in the 2nd rank. You flash the hand sign for weak with 2 fingers and a down tilt. Joke acknowledged, joke denied. The column collects itself around the quiet. You keep the ladle steady when the cart lurches. Oak does its oaky work. Dipstick, chalk, check the rim, make it travel. A drummer boy hums a march that will be theirs by noon. The smell of vinegar from the casks and tallow from breakfast becomes the smell of a day that might spare people's knees. At the first halt, you set the cask in a circle of boots and let the dipstick speak in public. A provost sidles up with the look of a man who suspects virtue has moved in without his permission. Inspection, he says, the word trained to be taller than it is. You show him chalk, stick, ring. Your measure posted where fists can't argue. He doesn't step over the circle you made with your eye. They're cheated, he tries, for the benefit of a listening habit. You lift the stick and he watches the wet line bury the quarrel he brought. He relents without blessing you. That is as good as an ally. The first grumble arrives mid-morning, as regular as weather. Too thin. The man who says it has shoes that remember city cobbles. You answer with the only sermon you will preach, you'll do the miles. Your hand signs move along. He will be grateful by midnight and forget to apologize. This is how policy survives being right. Between halts, the cooper's ear catches a sulky bead at the bung. Frost, or the cart's temper, has taught the seam a bad habit. He kneads wax in a palm, warms a lead patch against his wrist, and dresses the leak like a priest who learned his Latin in a smithy. You hold the cask steady with your knee, because there are nouns you can help by being a verb. The bead thinks about itself and resigns. You boil more brook at noon. The beetle swears the well is lined, and it may be. You prefer to swear for yourself, copper up, fire under, boil long enough to make men trust things again. Rinse the firkin with a hot, righteous rinse. Vinegar for cask health, not for sting. Chalk the ring. The ladle discovers its job has not changed. A friar palms you a chit from the townsman, which is a sentence that smells like trouble. Opened by order, it claims. With a wax that never learned humility, you slide it under the cup book where spilled ink dries. You will file it as tomorrow's joke if it stays polite. If not, you will fold it twice around the provost's day. The surgeon moves like a man who has time for the living. He gives you 3 names, and you knot yellow thread on their cup handles. Fatigue party, convalescence, sick list first. Saturday Strong has been retired without ceremony. Your ledger learns new verbs, issued, returned, rinsed, set by. You draw the dot beside the name of a man who must be taught again not to drink with both hands. By dusk, the ratio you chalked at dawn becomes a climate. The march has moved like water, downhill where it could, around where it must, over where pride imagined it would. The lad who wanted to drink before count now carries a can with the head held steady. You tip the last of the firkin into his jack and add a finger's width of clean water from the copper, because kindness can be arithmetic if you let it. He doesn't notice. His feet will. Camp is a ring of small arguments. You put yours down where it belongs and make it law for an evening. Cask head scoured. Bung in. Chalk ring left for dawn like a promise no one else will swear. You tuck the dipstick under the thwart where your hand will know it before your head does at Revile. The drummer boy, the one with opinions earlier, practices the hand sign for enough to a friend and gets it right. You pretend you don't see the lesson teach itself. Captain walks past your bench and doesn't slow. His eye drops to your chalk hand and leaves. That is the compliment you came to earn. You learn the hidden worlds when you go looking for sleep. The alewife's ledger remembers last year's strengths like a kindly aunt. There were days all small beer, days one, days the frost stole your options and you let the men fall in love with hot broth instead. The cooper's kit lives under the limber chest with all the things that speak oak to oak, drivers for hoops, spiles that can be persuaded to breathe or not breathe. The surgeon's folded list of men excuse spirits has a thumbprint at the corner and your own sweat in the crease. A hand sign develops in the half-dark between men who haven't had the song knocked out of them yet. Strong? Weak? Enough. Move along. You are learning to conduct a march with your wrists. At last light you walk back to the cask heads with your chalk. On one you draw a second ring, thin as a whisper, to remind yourself what the copper will have to do at dawn if the road stays long. On another you circle the bung in a small loop, your private sign for swollen right. Leave it to rest. The guard at the fire watches you be superstitious with a stick of chalk and decides he respects you more for it. A lad, another drummer, always drummers, sidles up and touches the chalk ring as if it were warm. They'll say you stole strength, he repeats, because boys repeat what sounded brave in other mouths. You lean the dipstick against his shoulder like a crutch and let it rest there until he feels its weight. I'm still carrying, he says, surprised. You nod. That's the point. One last inspection, because paranoia is the cooper of prudence. Bungs in, wax holds, no spile sulking, vinegar smell gone from where it shouldn't be, chalk where chalk belongs, ladles rinsed and hung with their own small dignity, the copper sleeping with a rim of clean across the top. a promise to tomorrow that nobody else has to believe in. The first dilution changed more than the morning. Your hand put a ring on wood, and the column learned to live inside a rule spoken softly. Men who would fight over a story will walk for miles inside a number. You are not the law, you are the man with a bung key who decided to let arithmetic be kinder than threats. If you were at the stave with me, if the captain's eye were on your chalk hand and the brook's steam were on your face, would you go one or less? Drop 1 to 1 or weaker in the comments, and where you're watching from. I read them when the copper starts to talk and the yard remembers its morning. Revel will wake the dipstick first. Gray light will find the chalk ring where you left it. The quartermaster's cart will complain its way into the yard. The captain will say, "Make it travel." Once the drummer boy will look for theft and find legs. And you will draw the second ring, but narrower, and open the copper, and boil the brook, and swear not in the name of a saint, but in the name of the men's feet, that the miles will be done, and the song will return eventually, because you made a barrel behave. Reveille shakes the canvas like a big dog shedding rain. You're up before the drum says so, because the copper likes to be petted into work, and you learned yesterday that the fire listens if you speak first. Tinder under, kindling slanted, you lean in with a spark and the breath you save for jobs that must be done before other people remember their names. Flame licks, water heaves, steam forgets itself and becomes the morning. Routine settles with the dust. That is its mercy. Fire under the copper. Boil the water. Rinse the cask, hot enough to wake oak, vinegar enough to keep history from growing teeth. Chalk the ring on the head so arithmetic outranks rumor. You set the dipstick against your thigh, count the notches with your thumb so your head doesn't have to, and chalk a narrow band where today's strength will live. Small beer again, stretch to 1 to 1 for walking rather than singing. You knot thread on the cup handles before the first file wanders over, pretending not to be eager. White for water cut, blue for the stronger issue to convalescence, yellow for the fatigue party you will ask too much of before the sun forgets itself. Your fingers learn the knots because they must. A bow that can be untied with a bite if a man is shaking. A hitch that won't come loose when a wagon jolts. You hang the cups on a laundry rope strung between wagons so the rinse can find air and not mildew. It looks like a festival for people who don't believe in them. Ledger open. You write the verbs that keep everyone honest and no one humiliated. Issued, returned, rinsed, set by. The words line up neat as drill. Your chalk ticks the cask head without flourish, and the cask doesn't require it. A drummer clacks the sticks twice. First halt in an hour, the captain said, because he is kind in ways no one writes songs about. You'll need to post strength where boots can read before the first halt. You push the rota across your plank, a small choreography that will be performed by men who didn't know they were dancers. 2 carriers to the cask each halt, 1 man to the copper to keep the water proud, 1 to the field kitchen to borrow broth steam for the sick list if the surgeon looks like a thundercloud, quicklime to the slick where horses forgot their manners, chalk to the steadiest hand in the squad. Today, that is the file corporal with slow eyes and slower temper. He understands numbers like a man respects cliffs. The first halt peels on the air, and the circle sets itself under your feet, pints by squad, dipstick checked in front of the file. It is important to make virtue public and speed private. You plant the stick and lift it so everyone can see the wet mark kiss the notch you chalked. You tilt the cask a hair to answer physics with respect. The first jack fills. The first white thread cup drinks. The first too thin dies under a glance from a man who remembers yesterday's miles. Provost appears like weather that thinks it invented itself. He carries a book that would like to be an accusation. Inspection, he says, rehearsing a word that would rather be taller. If you let him inside the circle, gossip will leak out with him. If you refuse, he will leave with 3 syllables, cheated, that your men will hear later from someone else's mouth. Either way, the noon halt will not wait, and the copper is humming like a good mule left alone too long. You draw a ring at boot tips with the end of your stave. Threshold only. You let him see your chalk, your posted ratio, the dipstick's wet proof. You keep your mouth busy with verbs. Issued. Returned. He leans, measures the distance to your cask with a veteran's eye, and steps back on his own. Carry on, he says. because inspection is a favorite word until somebody uses arithmetic near it. Between halts, the column puts its head down and became what it was built to be, a rope that can turn and still look like itself. The quartermaster's cart jolts like it has opinions. The copper breathes, tallow smokes, broth from the field kitchen carries the smell of meat that never volunteered. You send your 2 yellow-threaded cups to the surgeon's bench, where he hates the taste of gratitude and drinks it anyway. Back at the cask, the first drama of the day behaves on schedule. The ink bottle tips across the cup book like a sermon nobody asked for. You lever your elbow under the plank, raise, tuck, rag, press. 3 names blur. You already know those men's cups by thread and dent. Your hand will recopy when the light is lazy later. For now, you walk the roster with your eye and catch the swap you smelled when 2 squads traded cups out of habit and hunger. Blue in the wrong hand, white in the other. You fix it without scolding like a man straightens a tent rope that just forgot itself. The lantern crawls closer in the dusk of a wagon's shadow, and you finish before patience decides to help. A friar palms you a chit at the noon well. From the townsman, he whispers, which is not a phrase built to make anyone calm. Opened by order, the seal says, "The wax too neat." You give it your palm, slide it under the ledger where spilled vinegar will sweat the mischief out of it, and smile with the part of your face that promises later and means never. The beadle at the well swears the lining is sound and delicate, the way men swear about things they've paid for. You set the bucket on the wall and lower the rope with the logic of cautious people. The sun uses your neck for practice while you decide whether the well deserves its compliment. You boil it anyway. Copper up, fire under. Reflex wins the court case against trust. The afternoon sets its little traps and watches you admire them. A porter sidles to the edge of your circle with an extra dipper and an extra grin. "A dram for the captain," he suggests, having met fewer captains than he imagines. He indicates a private purse with a finger that has never pushed a wheel out of ruts. "Opened by order," he murmurs. Your chalk finds the cask head, your stave finds the ground. "Enough," your wrist says. "Move along," he does. Later he will rent extra dips to men who like getting caught. Tonight you will be the man who pretends to be surprised. 3 corporals never queue for cups. The second secret slate reminds you when you open the plank that hides it. This is how armies love, badly, on paper. You erase 1 name because that man lent his tent to 3 men who forgot their mother's names during the last rain. You leave 2 because rules hold if they bend where everyone agrees they should. You slide the slate home. The ledger lifts its eyebrow and becomes innocent again. Saturday Strong, the old joke, has been replaced without ceremony by sick list first. The surgeon appreciates a policy he didn't have to write. He sends you men with yellow thread and a shrug that covers gentleness with spittle. You set their cups under the ladle and let the hot go out before you watch them pretend not to wince. Your ledger makes them neat, issued, returned, rinsed, set by. The field kitchen breathes steam and lieutenants wander near it, because coffee doesn't exist yet, and command secretly believes in broth. A bandage around a forearm goes dark at the edge, and you pour warm water across it without being asked. The man on the other end of the arm doesn't look at you because some things only count if no one knows who deserves credit. At the 3rd halt, the provost tries again, this time with a word heavier than inspection. "Sheeted," he says to the edge of your circle. He'd like it to ricochet. The men hear the sound their boots make against road, and not his experiment. You draw a chalk tick on the cask head in view of everyone. The dipstick says what the chalk promised. He grunts a vowel that wants to be litigation and leaves. You admire his dedication to being wrong. Tallow smoke hangs on the road where the wagons have made lanes out of dust. Laundry rope between wheels flirts with dignity. Rinsed cups breathe in their own small breeze and promise to be useful again. You like things that come back when called. At dusk, the billet door has the nerve to look homely. The last issue feels like confession more than ration. A boy from the fatigue party holds up 2 cups and an apology. You knot yellow thread on one and rinse the other with a slosh that smells like savings. He grins because you let him keep his mistake and his pride. He'll walk extra tomorrow without telling you that's why. You pull chalk around the final cask head for the night. A ring that will find you at Revier like a favor you gave yourself. The cooper taps hoops with his driver the way some men knock on heaven. Wax holds where it should. The bung breathes only the way a lung does. You set the dipstick under the thwart like a dog that has earned sleeping near your bed. Then comes the small thing that changes bigger ones. A new lad with city shoes and country posture says they watered my pay like a joke, like a mutiny on training wheels. You hand him the dipstick. Hold this to your shoulder, you say. He does and realizes a stick can be a weight and a measure. Still carrying, he says. You nod. That's the point. The camp settles into the music of men whose work is done when it looks like it happens by itself. You walk the rope where cups will dry to nothing anyone would want to steal. You write one private ring on the cask head of the hogshead for morning thinner, you tell yourself, because the miles look longer than the map. The captain passes by and peels his voice off your shoulder long enough to make the smallest compliment he knows how to give. Traveling, he says, not to you, not to the chalk, to the road. You let the chalk think it was meant for it. A wind comes across the yard with the smell of water doing what it's told. You are not often sentimental. You allow yourself this once, a gratitude that tastes like broth without meat. The rota pegs are set. The quicklime sits where hoof and heel will be in the morning. The chalk is in the pocket of the man who won't lose it when he's shouted at. You might have made a day do what it was supposed to without threats, which is the most dangerous habit a column can learn and the most useful. If you had the rope and the ledger and a provost with a book and a word, if he wanted inside the circle, would you let him step into quiet rumors or keep him at threshold to protect the choreography? Drop threshold only or inside inspection in the comments and where you're watching from. I read them when the copper starts to whisper, and the first ladle teaches the first ring to behave. Then you sit on your crate and count, because counting is how you keep ghosts away. Issued, returned, rinsed, set by. You let the road creep into your legs and make them think it was their idea. You put the chalk away and feel its dust in your pocket, the way quiet rules have dust in their language. Drums mumble. Horses forget why they're angry. The barrel under your hand becomes a policy again instead of a temptation, and the men inside your ring become miles you can measure, 1 to 1, less if you need to, enough if you can help it. Frost tightens the taps and the bung answers with a sulky bead. You feel it before you see it. Oak gone sullen under your palm, the little cold ache in wood that tells the day it plans to misbehave. You wedge your knee against the cask, fetch the warm wax and the lead patch from the cooper's roll and crack the lid with your thumb to wake the kit. The cooper slides in beside you without ceremony, warms the thin square of lead against his wrist, thumbs the beeswax until it softens, and dresses the seam with the patience of a man who speaks oak. Shorties, he mutters, as if law can be rubbed into wood. You press while he trims the edge with a dull knife. The bead thinks about itself, then resigns. At the inn door, a market man discovers a crowd and the sound of himself. They water your pay, he declares, generous with other men's outrage. The murmur grows a backbone. The warden lays his palm on the cordon bar and sets the street's tone without rising a note. Warden's peace at the cordon, he says, and the phrase fits the timber like an iron hoop. To you he adds the day's answer, short and clear, demonstration without spectacle, cups counted in the open, sick list warmed first, chalk fresh on the head. From the church stairs the sacrist contributes the footnote only he is allowed to write. No clatter, mass. Your nod adds the last word the job requires. Understood. You move. Copper up, fire under. The brook's morning in the basin becomes obedient again. Rinse the cask hot, wake the oak, rinse out yesterday's pride, and sling a vinegar swill that leaves the staves clean, not bragging. Chalk the ratio fresh on the head where boots can read it. Draw the tick that promises the dipstick will agree in public. Set the brazier behind your bench, where eyes cannot invent luxury from heat. Set the quicklime by the trough where hooves turn the flags into opinion. The first rope lowers from an upper window, and the first white thread cup lands like a well-taught bird. The surgeon's bench grows a shadow that means he has begun counting on you. Choice comes earlier than courtesy. Upper window hoists first, cleaner, faster, less breath on your hand, or the sick list at the bench, needier, slower, more honest pain. You touch the yellow thread, cups on your plank. Feel the decision sit in your wrist and let the surgeon win the morning. You cradle the first hot cup under a cloth, and cross the small aisle the cordon has taught the crowd to respect. The wise woman at the corner watches and nods in the way people nod when a rule keeps its promise. The ration bell lifts a hush into place. A herald's trumpet from the square slices a rumor into pieces too small to be useful. The cellarer hisses move at two heads that try to become a line before you give them permission. You keep your noise at your elbows. Ladle, cup, cloth, hand. Issued, returned, rinsed, set by. Your ledger's verbs hold the day the way hoops hold staves. A boy sags at the spigot, the weight of a jack incorrect for his chest. Your sleeve becomes a rail before his knees find a story to tell. The cup steadies. He laughs softly, the laugh men make when they choose not to faint, and the line forgives him because you did not make a lesson out of a limb. You count in the open, slow enough for skeptics and quick enough for hunger, dipstick in, wet mark out, chalk ring kissed in public. 1 to 1, you say to the air in a voice no one can quote angrily later. The market man retunes his claim and fails to like the new key. He tries again anyway. They water your pay, you tilt the cask and show him arithmetic. His myth meets the stick and finds itself unmusical. Under the bench, the cooper packs his kit with the quiet pride of a patch that holds. He pats the seam once, a benediction with wax on it. You pour another cup for the surgeon's bench and a handful for the upper windows. Laundry ropes sigh, cups go up and come back down. Chalk grows tidy beneath the ring on the head. The wise woman slides you a rosemary sprig by way of a hand that is allowed to lie as rescue. To keep hands sweet, she says to the cloth, not to you. You pinch a leaf into the hot and the steam remembers what decency smells like. At the trough, quicklime hisses where last night's horses forgot their manners. You scatter it with the stave end and think of all the small white sounds that have saved a day. A passerby catches a glimpse of the brazier as wind medals. His mouth opens to try luxury, then closes when your ladle meets the chalk measure and the stick says what the ring promised. Demonstration, not spectacle, but enough. The apothecary strolls by the fence with his traveling premise. Small beer saves bowels, he announces to a man who didn't ask. The priest near the church door hears a tankard get blessed with chalk, sees a charm scribbled by a hopeful hand, and frowns it away. No spells on cups, he warns the doorframe. You note device, not charm, in your book, because words do their own dilution when let out among people who like their nouns nervous. The sacrist watches your elbows as they talk the ladle into decorum. Mass breathes inside the nave like a patient animal. No clatter. You oblige him. Heat moves in cloth, not air. You tap the cask with the back of a knuckle before each pour because you are superstitious in the ways that save time. The stick does not scold you for it. The chalk approves by staying true. The market man tries one last rake at the crowd. They water your pay. The warden's palm remains on the bar. You show the open count again, let the wet notch evangelize quietly, move without sermon to the next cup. A soldier with city shoes and country appetites nods at your public arithmetic like a man noticing bridges are built from journals and bolts, not promises. You begin to suspect he will be useful by next week. Mid-morning, a cooper's patch somewhere far back in the column proves itself righteous by staying boring. A herald's trumpet cuts another baby rumor before it learns to walk. The cellarer hisses move at a different angle because his job is to be wind without being weather. The surgeon's list shrinks by 3 cups and 1 relieved sigh. Your ledger fills with ticks under rings, a forest of proof that the day's water is doing what the men's feet need. You feel the crowd relax in increments. Half a shoulder, 1 jaw, a hand that stops clenching a coin. The sacrist drops his palm from the stone and lets the church keep its secret by itself. The warden's peace becomes furniture. The market man becomes an afternoon without letters to write. The brazier goes back to being iron with a purpose. If you were on my side of the cask, if frost had tightened the taps and a mouth had found a crowd, who fills first when the bell hangs its hush? The upper window hoists cleaner, faster, or the surgeon's bench, needier, slower. Drop windows or sick list and where you're watching from. I read those when the patch cools and the chalk dries. You chalk the last tick under the ring on the head. You wipe the rim with vinegar that has learned to be kind. You tuck the rosemary stem under the plank to remind the afternoon what morning smelled like. You set the dipstick where your hand will find it without talking to your head. The bung holds. The bead sulks no more. The rumor goes looking for cheaper lodgings, and the crowd returns to its errands without taking your name with it, which is the quiet proof you were hired to provide. Torches gutter and make the yard look cheap. The gate bars with that elbow-deep clunk that tells a town its say is over for the night. Word, which has no curfew, walks past the inn yard anyway and finds a crowd ready to hire it, Monkley Cups, favored squads. The jeers spend well because they cost nothing. Inside the hall, candles argue with wax, and the beadle thumps his stick once against your plank to say the only thing he knows how to say: copy fair, copy fast, flawless. Public notice, quiet passage to and from the ration, fines, written as alms because the cellarer likes the taste of the word, for cup losses. Sick list ration affirmed in ink that even tomorrow's cowardice can't smudge. On paper, orders to rinse and air. On paper first, then in lungs. Your hand squares the page. The pen does the job you taught it. You write without romance. Quiet passage to and from the ration. No jostling the cordon. No inspections without the warden's palm on the bar. Cup immersements to be tallied and bound with twine. Recognizances taken at the bar with crosses that look like blushes. Sick list ration to be warmed and served first. Rinse and air to be done at every halt, not when people remember. You leave the small doors a house needs to breathe. Save collapse, save fever, save order under strain. Your sandpot tips, a little hiss, and the grit lifts wet into mat. Before you can breathe, a flare at the back shed blooms. Orange climbs rafters like it practiced all winter. You and two boys have the buckets in your hands and the line knows to hold its breath. Wet wool hisses on embered planks, and the sound touches the jeer outside and shortens it by half. The last shovel of ash sulks itself into tomorrow. The beadle points the stick at the margin as if you were the one who will be punished if the world keeps happening. Copy fair, copy fast. He slides a small slip under your thumb with a practiced accident. Keep this quiet, the margin says in a hand that learned script at the same school as Guile. You lay the slip under the cup book and rest your palm on it until the urge it brought forgets its name. Omit it forever. Your bone says to your nerve, and your nerve sits. A coin rings on the plank and refuses to shine. The dead carrier's sister stands there with shoulders like broom handles and a mouth that learned to be brave before it learned to be polite. 5 words different, she says. Save the sick from strong ale. She does not beg. She drafts you into a cause that is older than policy and younger than grief. You put your pen to the line where exceptions live without teaching the town to expect them, and write the small sentence that will solve the large problem. Sick list may be watered outside schedule on warden's order. The beadle's cough finds you at the worst syllable. You don't lift the blade. He will learn to call this line his idea later. Under the guest loft, a trap opens with the humility of a grin. Men descend with coin and come up with less. Extra cups, someone says in a tone he thinks is neutral. The porter posted there is a new sort of clever. Your eye writes the place on the wall where nails will go when morning decides to become righteous. You carry the fresh page to the bar. Key rings stack like teeth on the bailiff's belt. Cartwheels squeal their indignation at the restraint. The warden nods to you without turning his head. You hammer the notice where boots can read it and hands can't pretend they weren't told. A drum somewhere inside the crowd begins the little roll that helps policy sound like a tune. The outer bar leans toward riot, as grass leans toward a ditch when wind is bored. If the jeers aren't answered, the market man will sell his sentence all the way to the square. If you answer them wrong, you will dine under a stone labeled to be silenced before the week is done. The column is learning your handwriting is where mercy lives. That, too, will be held against you by men who prefer nouns to verbs. Inside, the air learns to smell like rosemary and vinegar again. Steam from the copper warms the notice just enough to make the wax feel important. Tallies of cup immersements bind themselves with twine. Recognizances sign themselves with awkward crosses. The beadle finds a cough for the line about fines and a silence for the one about warming the sick list. The astrologer drifts through the door and pronounces the hour lucky if men stop talking, then pushes the luck forward with his thumb when clouds fatten near the tower. Nobody pays him. He forgets to be offended. The porter with extra dips wanders by with a spare ladle and a private grin. A dram for the captain, he suggests. Captains do not drink at the rope like this. You take the ladle, leave him his own, and set the spare in the basin with a noise that knows the sacrist likes silence. Opened by order, he murmurs, and palms a chit you didn't request, wax making its face as credible as a child. You slide it under the ledger next to the beetle's margin, and watch the paper remember what it's for. You lay your hand on both, and call that filing. A patron's runner appears with another folded promise, and that look boys get when they've been taught to think power can be worn. Keep this quiet, he says, not knowing he is the second man you have told no without moving your mouth tonight. You look at his seal until it discovers it is frightened of you. He disappears like a weather system, deciding it always meant to be a rumor. Now the contested name in your pocket burns in earnest. A corporal whose cousin often stands with the steward under the archway expects to show up on the sick list warm page tomorrow. His cup has never lowered a thread in the right place. His boots do not remember mud like they should. You hold his name as if it were a hot coin. Erase or obey, unlock or relock. You drop the name on the plank, and the rosemary tack under your hand holds it a second longer than it wants to be held. You set it aside and add another, thin lad with a cough the surgeon notices but will forget to write down until noon. Your handwriting is where mercy lives. You will have to use both hands to keep it from becoming where favoritism goes to hide. Outside, the jeer tries a new rhyme, favored squads. The clerk from the hall leans near the warden's ear and whispers moderation like a superstition he inherited. You read your notice aloud because policies are louder when they're seen and said. Quiet passage to and from the ration, sick list first, no paid cups, rinse and air, fines to the chest. The market man throws his line one more time, monthly cups, and it lands on your chalk ring and dies like a last fish that didn't realize the river had learned arithmetic. The cart's axle squeals at the gate, a sound that makes men with tools find their wits. Key rings chatter. The beetle's cough migrates to a corner where it can do less harm. The warden signs the bottom of the notice with the letter he learned to use when he stopped needing to prove he carried a stick. The sacrist touches his palm to the doorpost by the church stairs and removes it because the stone says it can mind itself. The astrologer announces that the lucky hour has left for better company. If you were in my boots, if a sister's coin rang dull on your plank, and a patron's slip asked your hand to forget itself, would you omit or obey? Put omit or obey in the margin here, and where you're watching from. I read them when the copper's steam has taught my head its better manners. Beneath the guest stare, the cellaret yawns, either bored or guilty. Men step down into the dim and come up with lighter pockets and excuses that make their eyes smaller. You wait until they forget to lower their voices and then walk to the hatch, lift it with your stave, and count bowls by the light of a dislike you didn't bother to hide. 2 more than we issued, 2 fewer than we set by. The cellarer's hand finds your shoulder and places a finger on tomorrow in the ledger. Make it a line, his thumb says, with nails. A father with city boots and field hands brings his boy to the rope, and the boy learns to hold a cup without worshipping it. You knot yellow on his handle and pretend you didn't notice him flinch when the hot went out. The surgeon grunts a thanks. You are content to translate for him as a habit he likes. You seal the night with a ring you drew in the morning. Chalk true, cask rinsed, cups aired, rope hung. The beetle closes his stick as if it were a lid. The warden removes his palm from the plank and nothing falls because most days the plank never needed him. The day needed to see his hand there. Under the notice, the drum does its little roll once more like it knows the difference between command and reassurance and was built to love the latter. You file the sister's coin in the dish that calls itself alms, and know it is a verdict you will keep rereading until your finger stops tasting of metal. You file the patron's chit in the drawer where later goes to die without taking anyone with it. You file the contested name in the place where men who don't yet deserve warmth wait to learn how to deserve it. You keep the second slate where it belongs, a secret you can be called to account for when someone in a better hat remembers to be brave. Torches gutter as if on cue. The gate bars out there find their clunk. The jeers wander off to cheaper lodgings. Inside, rosemary and vinegar thin out to a memory you will carry into morning. The copper, which has been civilized all night, sighs. Your chalk hand, which has been brave all night, rests on the plank where the notice dries. Your name slides off the lower corner of the Beatles' To Be Silent stone because you wrote the lines the way a man writes after he has decided to be useful instead of heroic. You pick up your ledger and discover that tonight your verbs did more work than any threat ever would. Issued, returned, rinsed, set by, omitted, filed. The column learns people can be convinced into order and never notice the moment they stopped being dangerous. That is the price of watered ale, not glamour, not indulgence, not a song anyone will hum in a tavern, just lanes that move, stomachs fed, wounds tended, and a road that believes mourning is something it can afford. You bank the brazier, you test the bar on the door, you put the chalk in the pocket of the man who won't lose it. You sleep where men with ledgers sleep, close to the place where policy is stored, and far from the trap under the guest loft. And if you wake before reveille, it will be to the taste of rosemary on your thumb, and the memory that a coin rang dull, and you found 5 words to answer it that didn't require anyone to raise a voice. Dawn unlaces the yard with pale fingers. Trumpets taste the air. Drums remember the beat they promised. The velvet voice climbs its crate by the bar and makes a gracious noise on behalf of a man who has never carried a bucket. His grace commends those who kept quiet order at the ration. Cups gleam because you made them. Windows stand open because a bargain in ink said they must. The brazier glows low only because the rule allowed it, and you played midwife to moderation. You are the first shadow at the barrel. Keys bite your hip. Cord coils on your shoulder. The brazier gives a last faithful sigh. If you've marched this far with me, stay for the reckoning. We'll carry paper to where it sticks, file what must outlast gossip, and set the last ring of chalk with a hand that knows what it cost. The market man with the myth goes by the bar free as air, his tune rewritten to flatter arithmetic. A midwife's lintel in town wears yellow instead of red because your exception found a pen. A widow folds to the cobbles near the inn. 2 strangers make a chair of their hands and lift her as if they always knew how. The velvet voice finishes the page, and people accept being commended because it costs them nothing now. Your errands are the sort that make a day behave afterward. You are final witness and courier of consequences. 1 duplicate to the warden, quiet passage, fines to the chest for cup loss, sick list ration affirmed, rinse and air by the hour. He signs without moving his mouth and gives you only the look that adds a line to your spine. I saw 1 to the sick row, the page with the 5 words a sister bought with a dull coin last night. Save the sick from strong ale, pinned under the shelf where rosemary and vinegar keep their polite conspiracy. 1 to the guild, hung on a peg with twine that will fail by none unless you replace it, because spectacle secretly hates paper. Over yesterday's shut-ups for cup loss, the muster sheet for the King's Levy has been pinned, wide as a promise you didn't make. Names begin to gather at the bottom edge, where pride and hunger share ink. You finally understand what watering bought. Not glamour, obedience, not luxury, lanes that move, stomachs fed, wounds tended, and a harvest of men promised for later because fields always find a way to ask loudly. You set the sick roster over the cup pegs, yellow threads in a row like small suns, blue for next, white for the steady. Vinegar coins clink in ladles at the chest and sound like the hymn tired people prefer. A parchment gets marked misadventure for a slip at the wet flags. You wanted better nouns when you were younger. You like this one now. It cleans what it must without pretending to be justice. Then the decision you kept kicking down the road meets you where you keep the chalk. The secret slate of spared cups, the 3 households who did not queue because you decided they could be trusted with quiet exemptions, and the side list of barrels you aired against orders in the cold week when men's lungs began to give up. Leak, burn, or file. You hold both like hot bread. Leak would be honest and short-lived, and you would be too. It would land in the square like a good sin and die like a rumor with no patron. Burn would be quick and cowardly. It would protect everyone who deserves to be questioned and punish the only person who had to be brave in the right direction. File is the story this city survives by. It puts the proof where questions with real hats will find it and where gossiping mouths will not. You slide slate and list into the drawer under the ledger. The click your palm feels is a promise more than a noise. The steward arrives as if summoned by verbs. He offers you a badge, enamel winking like a hypothesis. Mark more wisely, he says, making livery sound like a future. The guildmaster takes up residence near your other shoulder and offers sanctuary till the pest passes, which is the right promise in the right tone with the right price. The warden walks by and gives you the look that says the thing he will never risk saying aloud, I saw. You smile with your wrists. You are staying with the barrel. They all understand. The public reading by the bar repeats itself. The velvet voice believes in threes. Chests of fines grown into carts like beasts that dislike being useful. Key rings stacked like teeth clack and laugh at small jokes. The last rosemary bundle smolders to ash by the brazier and admits to having been a device, not a charm, the entire time. You take its lesson. You have been writing devices into law for days. You add one final ring on the cask head, thin as a secret only your hand can keep. Tomorrow's ratio if the miles lengthen and the captain asks for legs instead of stories. You leave the ring there like a promise you can defend with a dipstick in public. You lift the bung and listen. Wood answers, wax holds. The cask is ready to become a policy again. Men who enjoy being seen arrive with their errands. The steward shows the badge and his old trick of loyalty for rent. The guildmaster offers the more difficult kindness, space beneath a eave where names do not echo. You choose neither. You own the keys, the cord, the brazier, and the silence, and the drawer where evidence sleeps until a better officer knocks. That is enough. At the cup pegs, a boy learns the shape of a knot that unties with a bite. The surgeon crosses off 2 names on the sick list and adds one with a shrug that means you were right earlier. The clerk from the hall pretends to straighten your notice and tells a friend the phrase moderation as if he minted it. You let him borrow it. Good words multiply when idiots carry them. Then the last little reckoning. A patron's runner tries again with a fresh chit, a wax blob pretending to be brave. The steward stands a pace away, smiling as if this time he hired your hand. The guildmaster watches without blinking. The warden signs something else and practices not looking like he agrees with you. You put your palm on the paper and let your hand decide. Omit. You chalk a dot on your wrist to pay for it later with an explanation the right person deserves. You swap one name on the sick roster and remove another. You have learned to do both motions in one breath and leave no smear. The market man passes again, this time practicing a compliment your ration taught him. The midwife going by touches the barrel with 2 fingers like a saint learning to bless wood. The widow, the square lifted, sits where she can watch dogs without temptation and people without debt. Europe runs on the noise of their lives, but this yard runs today on how softly you taught it to work. You deliver your last duplicate and admire none of it. The rope will creak in the right places tonight. The cups will dry without courting flies. The kneaded wax will outlast the weather it was told to. Your notice will survive the hour when the bar becomes a place to lean. You are the hinge that lets the system swing quietly, more than threats ever did. If you carried the slate and the list in your coat, if a badge shone and a sanctuary called and a warden saw, would you leak, burn, or file? Drop your word, leak, burn, or file, in the comments and where you're watching from. I tally those after the last ladle cools and the brazier goes black. You bank the brazier. You feel the bar give your shoulder back its weight. You tuck the chalk where the right hand can find it at revel. Vinegar lingers in your thumb and rosemary in your head. The barrel becomes a policy one last time before you leave it. Justice here was airflow and cup budget. Mercy here was policy, not indulgence. Survival here was the choreography of chalk, tokens, and staves. And you, not named, not sung, were the necessary hinge. When the drum taps for ration tomorrow, your ring will still be there, and the road will still believe it can be done.